Every single day, thousands of Americans try to join the military and they get told no. Not because they're weak, not because they're not patriotic enough, not because they failed some tests that they could have studied for. Sometimes it is because of that, but most of the time it's because of things they never knew would matter. Things that they can't really change and things that happened maybe years ago or conditions they were born with. I did 10 years as an Air Force recruiter and I had to crush more dreams than I ever really made come true. And most of the time it was for stuff people never really saw coming. Today, I'm gonna try to lay out everything that stops somebody from serving. I'm not trying to discourage you, but walking around with false hope is worse than knowing the truth. So maybe you'll watch this and you'll realize you're good to go, or maybe you'll realize that door is closed. But either way, you'll know where you stand. Now let's talk about the #1 dream killer I've seen. And it's probably not what you think. It's not criminal records, it's not drug use, it's medical conditions that people didn't even know disqualified them. And thanks to a new system called MHS Genesis, you can't even hide your medical issues anymore. In 2022, MHS Genesis changed everything. It was basically a system that connects to every major pharmacy database, every hospital system nationwide, previous military medical records, insurance records. It basically connects to those. So if you had a prescription filled once in college or once in high school, they can see it. If you had an ER visit at 2:00 a.m. from 10 years ago, they can see it. If you had a therapist because your parents divorced and you had to do mandatory counseling, they can see it. Well, it can't see everything. Genesis catches about 70 to 80% of medical history. Not everything. Like some rural clinics, they're not connected, or cash only practices, or even things that are like old, like from like the 1990s and back. But they can most likely find anything. And I know there's some things out there where people say that you can remove your name or remove your information from these databases so it can't be seen. But even with that, there's a lot of recruiters saying that stuff doesn't work. They're still going to catch it. They'll still see it. But as far as the medical stuff that is getting people disqualified, mental health is the #1 thing that recruiters are seeing day to day. About 50 to 60% of them dealt with some type of mental health issue, whether it was ADHD, depression, anxiety. Those were my big killers. And the reason why they were disqualifying most people is because they didn't fit within the threshold that the military wanted to see. So if you have a history like that and you want to get qualified, the military wants you to be off medication for like 24 months. But recently, a lot of that has changed and they are letting you in with these conditions without that 24 months off medication. Now you're seeing people get in as early as 3 to 6 months off medication. But if you want to better your chances, you already want to go out there and get your pharmacy records, the last 5 years of them. You want to get as much information to prove that you're a stable performer without medication. And you want to gather as much medical records as you can to try to prove that maybe this stuff isn't as deep as the military thinks it is. Basically, you're trying to show the military that this is no longer a condition and it's not going to stop you from performing military duty. And that's where a lot of people go wrong, is they can't prove that, so they get disqualified. Now here's something that gets people disqualified more than the ADHD, more than the depression and anxiety, is suicide ideation or self-harm. If you ever thought about seriously hurting yourself or suicide, if you ever attempted suicide, if you ever been hospitalized for a mental health crisis, if you ever been put on like a 72-hour hold, intentionally self-harmed yourself, whether it was cutting, burning, anything like that, one, it's probably going to show up in that system Genesis that we talked about earlier. Two, the military treats that as a liability. It doesn't matter if it was 5 years ago and you're fine now. If there's a record of it, it has to be explained. And that explanation better be airtight. I had an applicant who cut themselves. She said that it kind of helped her relieve stress. She cut herself like 3 times. We put it down on her documents and we sent it up to MEPS. And MEPS was like, no, like we're not going to allow her in. So we tried to push a waiver to the Air Force Surgeon General, and they also said no because they didn't deem her fit to serve. And what's weird is that there's people serving with a cutting history. Some people get in, some people don't. You can submit the same exact records for one and maybe they get through and the other person doesn't. That's how hard it is to get in with suicide ideation or self-harm. And the reason why is because the military is like, hey, we're about to put you into a super stressful environment. If you were stressed out before you joined to the point where you wanted to hurt yourself, then how do we know that that's not going to resurface in one of the most stressful pressure containers you've ever been in? And they don't want to take that chance. So I've seen the percentages of people getting in with something like that was like lower than 10%. Now, something I never seen get in was people with like a history of bipolar or schizophrenia. I've never seen any of those type of waivers get approved, or things like personality disorders, eating disorders, any autism or any type of spectrum of autism. These things are usually disqualifying. I'm not going to say always, because there's always a chance for a waiver, but usually you're not going to get in with something like that. Now I want to talk about physical conditions that get people disqualified. Asthma is a tricky one. They don't want any symptoms after your 13th birthday. If If you've never had any symptoms after your 13th birthday, you're usually good. But if you're using an inhaler in high school or past high school, that's a big problem. If you have exercise-induced asthma, that's a big problem. And asthma is kind of like the suicide ideation I spoke of earlier. Sometimes you can get somebody submit the same records that you submitted for somebody else. This person gets in, the other person doesn't get in. That pulmonary function test is a big factor of getting qualified. Something else physical that you're probably not going to get in with is diabetes. Type 1, you're definitely probably not going to get in. And type 2, maybe, but it's going to be extremely rare in any case. And then pre-diabetes maybe as well, but that's also going to be really hard to get in. I had a girl who had diabetes during pregnancy. I forget what they call it, but even that was hard to get her in. We had to prove that after her pregnancy, all of her blood work was good. And I had to prove that. I had to get like 5 years worth of records to prove that. Next is going to be seizures. If you had any type of seizures, like after the age of 5, you're most likely going to be disqualified. Anything like epilepsy, anything like that, it's going to be really hard to get in. Same thing with heart conditions. If you got any type of murmurs, depending on the severity of that murmur, you're probably not going to get in. Or if you have any other type of heart conditions or even high blood pressure, it's really hard to get in with heart conditions. Even if you have medication that controls your high blood pressure, you need to be able to show that you have controlled blood pressure without medication. Next, I want to talk about orthopedic issues like hardware in your body. And that's going to be case by case. Like if you have any type of titanium rods or anything like that in your body, it's case by case. I have seen a lot of success with this as long as everything is good to go and you can prove that you're fit for military service. But if you had like multiple surgeries like on the same joint, that's probably going to be a no. Or if you have chronic pain, like if you always hurting, back always hurting, legs always hurting, elbow always hurting. As soon as you show that this is consistent and it's happened on more occasions, you're probably not going to get in. But beyond all the medical issues, here's something that catches healthy people off guard. You could be in perfect health. You have never taken a pill in your life and still be disqualified from 95% of military jobs. I've watched some of the strongest candidates. I'm talking like super in shape, super fit. They can run fast as lightning. They got disqualified from almost every job, but like 10 of them. And it's all because of like a 2-minute test at MEPS. The color vision test is a dream destroyer. Here's something I realized. You could be colorblind your whole life and not know it. I've had people who did not know that they were colorblind go to MEPS and find out there that they are. You've been seeing the world a certain way your whole life, and then when you get to MEPS, they're like, hey, you're colorblind. You're like, no, I'm not. And it's not because you can't see like red and green. That's what draws a lot of the confusion, is that you can see those, but there's just different shades or there's different spectrums that you can't see. And the way they do it is they have you view like this platelet test, and basically they put numbers amongst these odd colors. And if you can't see the number within those colors, then you're colorblind. And that's going to disqualify you from a lot of jobs, like all your maintenance jobs, all your electrical jobs, most of your medical jobs, all of that stuff you're going to be disqualified from. So the only thing you can do is jobs like admin, infantry, working with food, logistics. Like that's pretty much it. You're going to have a small little pool of things that you can do. Something else that's devastating to people when they get to MEPS is a depth perception test. That test is made to see if you can see how close objects to you or how far away they are. They give you these circles that you're supposed to look at, and out of those circles, one of them is supposed to be popping out off the page if you have depth perception. If you don't have depth perception, they all just look like the same circle, all of them flat. If you do not have depth perception, this will disqualify you from jobs as well. Not as much as not having color vision, but it will knock some jobs off your qualification list. Some other stuff that gets people disqualified is if you cannot correct your vision to 20/40. When you go to MEPS, they're gonna let you put on your glasses, they're gonna let you put on your contacts, and you should be able to see. If you cannot see, then that's going to possibly disqualify you or limit you on some jobs. Something else that I saw get a lot of people disqualified was astigmatisms. And this is stuff that normally has to go up and get waiver approved. Now for astigmatism, there's really nothing you can do. You just got to send up your medical records and hope that they give you that waiver approval. Now here's something that got like 50% of people who came into my office disqualified. And this is something everyone can control. This is your height and weight. For every military branch, they have a height and weight standard. Basically, if you're this tall, let's say you're 6 feet tall, then you need need to be under 202 pounds. If you're over 202 pounds, then that disqualifies you. They even have minimum weight. Like for 6 feet, I think you have to weigh more than 139 pounds to join, at least for the Air Force. And there's some jobs that have height limits, like you can't be too tall or you can't be too short doing those jobs. Something else that physically gets a lot of people disqualified is gonna be tattoos or body modifications. If you got any face tattoos, you're automatically not gonna be able to join. Some branches allow you to have hand tattoos, even tattoos on the neck, but they have really strict standards on what they allow. So it's still mostly banned with those type of tattoos. If you have any offensive tattoos anywhere, and I'm not even talking about just the ones you can see, I mean anywhere on your body, then you're not gonna be able to join. Like if you got something like KKK or you got a naked woman on you somewhere, you're not gonna be able to join. If you got gauge ears, meaning like you got holes in your ears, you're not gonna be able to join. The rule is if they can see light, like if they put a flashlight to that hole and they can see light coming out the other end, then you're disqualified. So you're gonna have to get those ears closed up. Something else is braces. Like you cannot go to basic training with braces in your mouth. You have to have those things removed before you join. Now we're gonna get to the part that ruins more lives than anything else, and it's usually the stuff that happened years before someone even thought about joining the military. I had to deny like 30-year-olds from joining for something they did when they were like 18 years old. Like one mistake that they made, one bad night, it lasted with them forever. And that's gonna be your criminal record, or what the military likes to call your moral record. If you had any felonies, most likely you're not gonna be able to join. Now sometimes you got felonies that aren't that severe and people can join with them, but most of the time if you got any felonies, that's gonna disqualify you, especially if it's like a violent felony, like you're done. Now some branches are gonna be more flexible than others, of course, so if you get disqualified from one, you might wanna go check out the other and see what they can do. But like when it comes to DUIs or possession of marijuana, your chances start to improve a little bit, especially if you only had like one. Now if you've had multiple DUIs or you've had multiple possession of marijuanas, that's just showing that like you haven't learned your lesson, and that's when the military is probably not gonna approve you to come in. Now if you wanted to be like an officer and you had a DUI, that they're not gonna let you in. You don't get to play the waiver game as being an officer. But if you're joining enlisted, you might be able to get a waiver with one DUI or one possession of marijuana. Now as far as domestic violence, that's gonna be a no-go, especially if you have the Lautenberg Act on it, meaning that you can't operate a firearm. You can't join the military if you can't operate a firearm. And as far as drug charges, possession of marijuana is usually okay, at least to get a waiver to join. But anything outside of that, like when you start talking about meth, crack, heroin, if you start talking about those hard drugs, most likely you're not gonna get a waiver to join. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't do it, but most likely they're not gonna do it. Now, if you had small stuff like a speeding ticket, running a red light, maybe even driving without insurance or driving without a driver's license, those are like easy things to get in with. But if you start showing like a pattern, like multiple offenses of the same offense, that's where it starts becoming hard to get in. Even with juvenile records, a lot of juveniles, they get their stuff sealed, they get their stuff expunged, and they think they do not have to mention it. The military will be able to see your stuff most of the time. I did have one person I put in, and their stuff was really sealed, like we couldn't see it. So we just had to acknowledge what they did. We did a waiver and they got in. But you know what's crazy is you can be perfectly healthy, you could have never committed a crime, you could have never touched drugs and still be disqualified because you got outstanding debt. The military doesn't just check if you could do push-ups, they also do a credit check on you if they need to. Now for the Air Force, everyone doesn't get a credit check automatically. The only time you get a credit check when you're joining the Air Force is if you're going into a job that requires like a top secret clearance. I don't know how the other branches work, but I would assume they probably work the same way. Now when they do this credit check, they're not checking to see like what your credit score is. What they're looking to see is if you have anything in collections, if you have any outstanding debt, if you defaulted on any loans, if you've ever had a history of bankruptcy, if your debt to income ratio is really high. They're comparing your debt to the income you'll be making when you serve on that military income, not on your current income. I had an applicant one time, it's really weird. Him and his father shared the same name, and somehow his father started putting loans on his son's name as if it was him. So when the son came into my office, we did a credit check on him. He owned a house and he didn't even know it. And it messed him up. Like he had to go do all kind of crazy stuff to prove that that house wasn't his. Eventually he got unmotivated to join. It was so hard for him to get all that stuff off his name. He's just like, you know what? I'm not gonna join. Like it was really foul of his father to do that to him. But if you do have a history of financial stuff, that doesn't mean you can't join. What it will mean is you're not gonna be able to do any top secret jobs, and it'll disqualify you from other sensitive jobs as well. Now, something else the military looks at is how many kids you have. You can have too many kids, especially if you're not married. If you're not married and you have one kid, the military is gonna disqualify you. They can do a waiver, and they're pretty common for people to get waivers for having their kid. But the military basically says if you have a kid and you're single, it's probably gonna be really hard on you to raise that kid. So before we let you in, we want to ensure that you have a plan. You have a system of people who are gonna help you when we need you to do your training, if we need you to deploy, whatever we need you to do, we need to ensure that that kid is gonna be cared for. So if you're trying to join with a kid, you need to prove to the military that you have a plan like that in place. Now, there's some things you just can't do anything about to join, and it's gonna disqualify you. And that's like your age. Like each branch has age limits, and if you're over that age limit, there's just nothing for you to do. You just old. The Air Force just moved their age limit up to 42 years old. I won't say they just did it. I think they did it like back in 2021, maybe. I can't remember. But if you're under 42, you can still join. That's pretty good. I'm 40 years old. I'm about to retire. So I feel like if they're letting 40-year-olds in, that's pretty good. Like they used to be 27 years old when I joined back in 2006. That was as old as you could be. Now it's 42. Now, something else that can complicate your security clearance is being married to like a foreign spouse or having like foreign parents. This can just make your security clearance process a long time before you actually get one. Also, education can disqualify you. If you haven't graduated high school and you haven't gotten your GED, that can disqualify you. For the Air Force, if you do not have a high school diploma, you can join with a GED, but you're gonna need to score a 50 on the ASVAB in order to join. If you don't have a high school diploma or a GED, you still can join without either, but you have to score a 65 or higher on the ASVAB to join. Unless you've been to college and you have 15 credits of college or more. If you have 15 credits of college or more, they treat that the same as a high school diploma. Now, here's something you can't really find in a book or you can't find in writing. But if your recruiter doesn't like you, that can disqualify you. And what I mean by that is that some of these recruiters, they want to put people in that they want to work beside. They don't want to just put in anyone just because you want to join. They want to make sure they're putting the right people, finding the right talent to put into their military branch. And if they don't feel like you're it, they'll tell you, I'm sorry, we're not going to let you in. So I would always recommend that you go in and make a good impression. You don't go in there and try to piss people off or try to make them think that you're God's gift to earth. You just want to be humble and you want to be likable. Now look, if you made it through this entire video and you haven't heard one thing that's going to disqualify you, congratulations, you are rare. You got to remember that only 1% of America's population joins the military. So protect that status, stay out of trouble, keep your health right, manage your money. If you watch this video and you heard something that affects you, then you want to try anyway, because they do have waivers. Most of the stuff that I talked about is waiverable, but I do want you to go on with realistic expectations. Not everything is going to get waived, and sometimes it's case by case. Even if you apply for a waiver and it gets denied, it doesn't mean that you can't wait and apply again later. But remember, the military doesn't owe anyone any acceptance. It's not about fairness sometimes. Matter of fact, the military is an unequal opportunity employment. Like they stop you for stuff like age, health, and things that other companies cannot do. They have to maintain their combat readiness. Every standard exists because somewhere, sometimes, someone without that standard got people killed, or it cost the military millions of dollars. So I know it sucks when you're being told, no, you can't join, but unfortunately, it is the reality. Hopefully this video helps, and if you do find your way into the military and you want to learn to communicate like a superpower, I got a video on the screen right now that'll break that down. But like I always say, I hope this video brought value to you. Stay beautiful, stay classy, and until next time, check me out.